That's what she said, standing by the window like she owned the light. That I should stop being difficult. That it was for the best. That she and her husband were doing everything they could. I didn't say a word. I just slid the printed email. Across the table, let her eyes drop down to the bolded line. Account closed at client's request. Remaining balance withdrawn and certified check mailed to address on file. She went quiet after that. No more sighs, no more instructions. No more pretending this was kindness wrapped in control. I'm so glad you're here. Stay with me until the end. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this story travels. I had always been a quiet woman. I didn't yell in labor, didn't raise my voice when the laundry got left out in the rain. I didn't even cry when my husband left this world holding my hand in a hospice bed that smelled faintly of lavender and plastic tubing. I just sat. With it, the grief, the change, the newness of being alone in a house that echoed. I raised my daughter in that house, brick-fronted, 2 stories, creaking stairs that complained in the same places each time you climbed them. I made her pancakes on Sundays, packed her lunch in foil and hope, and clapped for every certificate she brought home like it was gold-leafed. When her father died, she moved in with her husband with her decisions. Said she didn't want me to be alone. At first, it felt like an embrace. A kind of family circle, warm and full of life again. But then, slowly, things began to shift. She started asking if I'd taken my pills. Started checking my calendar for appointments I hadn't told her about. If I forgot a word or paused too long, she'd smile too big and offer it for me. As if I were a child or a guest in my own mind, she started answering the phone on my behalf, telling friends I was resting, telling church folk I wasn't up for visitors. The house, my house, began to feel smaller with every locked drawer and hushed conversation behind the laundry door. I caught her once, whispering to her husband in the kitchen. I heard her say I was slowing down, that maybe I wasn't safe with the bills anymore. I listened from the top of the stairs, one hand gripping the banister, the other pressing against the wall like I needed proof I was still solid. Weeks passed, then months. A name started disappearing on utilities, on the car insurance. I didn't recall signing anything, but when I asked, she laughed and said I must have forgotten. She said she was helping, that her name was just there in case, that I should stop being difficult. But I remembered the porch swing. I remembered the way I tucked her in when she had fevers. It's a green cup with daisies on it that she only drank apple juice from, and the way she used to call me Mama in her sleep. Even after she turned 10, I remembered how to look things up. So one night, after she'd left her laptop open in the dining room, I sat in the dim light and taught myself how to find my own name, or the absence of it. And what I saw hollowed. Meow accounts consolidated, insurance changed, my will opened and revised. Legal jargon I didn't understand fully. But the direction was unmistakable. I was being quietly erased. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the hallway like a ghost, barefoot on cold floorboards, and let the truth settle in the corners. She wasn't taking care of me. She was taking control. A week later, I called the bank myself. I used my maiden name and asked for paper copies of everything. I opened a new account, transferred my pension quietly, closed the old one. I changed my mailing address to a friend's cabin I hadn't visited in years, but still remembered the way to. Then I waited. She came in one morning, brisk, efficient, her hands already moving like she was orchestrating a routine I no longer belonged in. She asked me why the card wasn't working, why the utility app locked her out, why she couldn't access the shared login anymore. I didn't answer. I only reached for the email I'd printed, folded neatly in thirds, and slid it across the table. Her eyes scanned it, and her lips parted just a little when she reached the final sentence. I told her I wasn't confused. I wasn't frail. I wasn't failing. I was done. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just blinked, like the light had changed too fast for her eyes to adjust. A lawyer I'd known through church came by later that week. He helped me revise everything. The will, the title deed, even the power of attorney papers she'd slipped under my nose 2 springs ago, masked as insurance updates. The day I signed the revised documents, I wore the same blouse I'd worn to her high school graduation, blue, soft, embroidered with small white thread along the collar. I wanted to remember what pride felt like when it wasn't tangled in pain. Eventually, I moved. Quietly, took what mattered, left the rest. A neighbor helped me load things into a storage unit while she and her husband were out at brunch. No confrontation, no scene. Just the sound of my key turning in the lock one final time. Now I live near the coast. In a cottage. Small enough to keep clean, but big enough to stretch my arms in. I have a lemon tree out back, and a swing I hung myself from the strongest branch. I don't speak badly of her. I just don't speak of her much at all. Sometimes I stir my tea at dusk and think of that line, "Stop being difficult." And I smile, because now I understand. What she meant was, stop noticing, stop resisting, stop being awake. But I am awake now. Fully, I used to believe in the myth of motherhood. The idea that if you loved deeply enough, gave steadily enough, held firm through the storms, your child would remember, would come back, would protect you the way you protected them when the tables turned. But motherhood isn't a contract. It's not reciprocal. It's a giving that doesn't promise return. Can I see that now? When she was born, I was 23 and unsure of everything, except her. The nurses handed her to me like something precious and temporary, but I never let myself believe she could be anything but mine. I held her skin to skin, counted the wrinkles on her tiny knuckles, whispered promises into her hair. I would never leave you. I would always fight for you. I would never let the world hurt you. Those were the years of tight budgets and looser sleep. We made do. Her father worked long hours, and I made the grocery money stretch like dough between fingers. I remember boiling the same chicken 3 times, soup, broth, and then rice water to make it last. But she never went without. Not when I could help it. There's a photo, or there used to be, of the two of us on the front steps. She's 4 in a pink coat too big for her shoulders, and I'm behind her. Arms wrapped around her middle, both of us smiling at something off camera. I don't remember who took it, but I remember that morning. Smell of maple syrup. The way her curls refused to be tamed. The sound of her laugh bouncing off the sidewalk. I don't know where that photo is now. Maybe it's in a box somewhere. Or maybe she threw it out when the boxes became hers to sort. She was a good girl. Once, kind, soft-hearted, she cried when the neighbor's cat died and begged me to let her keep its collar. She used to line up her dolls and pretend they were sick so she could tuck them in and kiss their plastic foreheads. I thought I was raising someone who would understand tenderness, who would never mistake it for weakness. But people change. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they just settle deeper into the parts they always were. The parts you tried to parent out of them. Her shift started small. She got more impatient in her 20s, especially after her father passed. She told me grief was making me clingy, that I needed to move forward, that I was being dramatic when I said the house felt haunted by the way the light fell in the afternoon. She said I shouldn't stay alone, that I needed supervision. I believed her then, believed it came from care. She and her husband moved in, like a rescue mission. Boxes and bags and laptops and chargers. She ordered new rugs without asking, changed the curtains, rearranged the kitchen so I had to open every drawer twice just to find a spatula. It felt temporary at first. Then it did, single quotes. I started missing things. A casserole dish. A book I'd bookmarked halfway through. Letters from my sister that used to live in the desk drawer. I asked gently where they'd gone. She said I misplaced them, that maybe I was tired. That memory fades when you're older, and it was normal. Asterisk normal. That word wore down my edges. It made everything I questioned sound like confusion? Like paranoia. One morning I stood in the middle of the living room and realized nothing was mine anymore, not even the silence. It had been filled with background noise from her shows, with Bluetooth speakers, with scented candles I didn't recognize. I felt like a stranger in a place that once carried the echo of lullabies and anniversary dinners. She took over the finances slowly, started with an offer to handle my bill payments just to make things easier. I agreed. I was tired. I just had a bad flu, and I thought it would help to have less to think about. So I handed her the login details. She changed the password. She said it was for security, that I'd forget, that I shouldn't worry about it anymore. I tried to speak up a few times. I'd start a sentence, I was wondering if maybe, but she'd interrupt with a laugh, pat my hand and say not to worry. She had it all under control. That became the phrase. Under control. She had me under control. I remember the day I went to make a doctor's appointment and found out I'd already seen him last week. Or so the receptionist said. When I told my daughter, she said I'd forgotten, that she'd taken me, that I'd been tired that day and she didn't want to stress me with details. But I knew I hadn't gone. I still had the note I'd written myself tucked into the drawer where I kept the insurance cards. The date was blank. She had made the appointment and gone without me. That was the first real crack in the window. That was when I started watching. I noticed the mail was always presorted before I got it. That the computer remembered different websites than the ones I used. That my phone calls stopped getting returned. When I called my old friend Lenora, she said she hadn't heard from me in months, but she had. She'd told me she'd left messages. I never saw those voicemails. I started pretending to nap in the afternoons so I could hear her on the phone. I heard my name mentioned like I wasn't upstairs, like I wasn't breathing just 20 feet away. I heard the phrases, she's not really herself anymore. We're trying to get ahead of things. I think she needs some kind of intervention. Intervention as if aging were a sin. As if my confusion was permanent and not planted. They started talking about the house like it was theirs. Mentioned repainting, changing the floors. You wanted to turn the sunroom into an office? She said the kitchen was too outdated for entertaining. I stood in that kitchen for 28 Christmases. I stirred cranberry sauce in that sunroom, with a late light painting the counter's gold dot. Now they talked about it like a renovation project, like my memories were wallpaper to peel away. That's when I stopped pretending everything was fine. That's when I got quiet, the kind of quiet that plans. That's when I called the bank. When I opened a new account, when I called a friend who owed me nothing but kindness and asked if her offer still stood, that spare room she always said was mine if I ever needed it. She said yes, of course. Come when you're ready. And I was getting ready every hour I pretended to be confused. I was taking inventory. Every time I smiled and nodded, I was saving details. Tracking what they didn't think I could understand because they thought they'd made me invisible. But I was still watching, still listening, and soon I'd be gone. I started making lists in my head. Not the kind of lists I used to keep when life was ordinary. Groceries. Birthdays, things to pick up for the church bake. Sale. These were quieter lists. Sharper, I wrote them in my mind while pretending to doze on the couch. While she talked over me on her calls, while the television hummed with game shows I never cared for, I kept track of every folder that disappeared. From the file cabinet, every drawer that stuck now when it never used to. Every time she said, "Don't worry about that," or "We already took care of it," as if my life was a set of errands being delegated. I noticed patterns. She always checked the mail first. Even on days when I was already at the door, she'd come up behind me like it was a routine, gently take the envelope from my hand, say she'd sort it later. I let her. At first, then I started hiding things. If a letter looked important, I'd slip it under my sweater. If she left the printer on, I'd glance at the queue. If she stepped out for errands, I'd open her laptop and take photos of whatever was still up on the screen. I didn't know what half of it meant, but I knew how it felt. It felt like theft wearing the mask of care. The real turning point came when I found the envelope. It was behind the dresser. Half crushed. I was dusting, not because I had to, but because I needed to feel like the house was still mine. The envelope had my name on it, and the address was the house. But the sender was unfamiliar. An attorney's office. Something about estate planning. I opened it. Inside was a draft copy of a revised will. My name appeared once near the beginning under a paragraph that read "Previous document holder." The rest was a trail of legal words and new beneficiaries. Her name, his name. Terms like conservator and medical proxy. Power of sale. My stomach went cold. I sat on the edge of my bed for what must have been an hour. I didn't cry. I just stared. The dresser drawer was still. Open, sock edges peeking out. Outside, a wind had picked up and the branches slapped softly against the window. My slippers felt too tight. My throat felt thick. She had already written me out. I hadn't signed anything, not willingly. And yet the paper was there. My life. Reduced to a draft, a plan waiting for a signature. I put it back in the envelope, hid it under the lining of my suitcase. The one she didn't know I kept packed, tucked into the back of the guest closet behind an old winter coat. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and stood in the doorway of the living room. She was scrolling through her phone, curled up on the couch, feet on the table like a queen on her throne. I asked her as plainly as I could why she thought I wouldn't notice. She looked up, gave me a smile so soft it almost felt like pity, said I was imagining things. That I'd probably seen some old mail, that maybe I'd had a bad dream. She offered to make me some tea, said I was tired, said my memory had been off lately. That was the first time I truly saw her. Not as my daughter. Not as the girl with the pink coat and the scraped knees. But as someone who had made a decision that I no longer needed to be believed. Only managed. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with the suitcase open, the envelope beside me. I took out the bank documents I'd printed. It's the password notebook I'd started keeping in a fake cookbook. The note from my friend, the one who'd said I could stay as long as I needed. I read everything twice. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to fight her in this house. Not where every chair had once held our holidays, where the pantry still smelled faintly of the cinnamon he used to sprinkle in his coffee. Not in this house. I needed my own air. I took the train into the city that day, told her I had a church thing. She barely acknowledged. She was on her laptop, headphones in, one hand flicking between screens. In the city, I walked 4 blocks to the legal office from the envelope. I had no appointment, but I had questions. I sat in the waiting room between a man in a suit and a young woman with a baby asleep on her chest. When my name was called, I stood slowly. My knees hurt. But my voice didn't shake. The attorney didn't look, surprised to see me. That told me everything. I asked for a copy of what they had. I showed. I said I hadn't authorized anything. He hesitated. Told me my daughter had presented papers. I asked to see them. Signatures looked familiar, but not like mine. It's almost like mine. Just enough to convince someone who wasn't paying attention. I left with copies. It's quiet, careful copies. That night, I put them in the bottom of my laundry basket under a towel. I washed the towel later, but not before moving the papers to a better hiding spot. Every step after that felt like a reclamation. I started redirecting my mail, one letter at a time. I opened a safety deposit box. I transferred the title of the house back into sole ownership. She'd had it altered through some sort of joint tenancy maneuver. The lawyer I hired helped me reverse it. Kay called it a clean break. I didn't confront her again. Not yet. Because this wasn't about arguing anymore. It was about building something of my own beneath the surface of what she'd tried to construct. And I knew something else now. I wasn't confused. I wasn't weak. I wasn't being difficult. I was waking. It's a strange kind of grief to lose someone who's still alive. To sit across from your own child and realize the version of her you loved has gone somewhere you can't reach. That the girl with syrup-sticky fingers and the bright laugh had become someone who would use your kindness as leverage. Who would take your silence for permission. But I've stopped mourning her now. I'm making room for truth, for air. For what comes next. Because what she didn't count on, what none of them ever seemed to, is that we remember. We remember where the deeds are kept. We remember who we were before they started calling us forgetful. We remember what matters. And now I was ready to act. I began to disappear, not in the way they wanted, not in the way of surrender or silence, but in the way a fox slips into the underbrush after it's heard one too many footsteps. I started letting go of the small things they tried to hold over me. I let her think I was resting more. I let him believe I had forgotten how to log into the utility account. I smiled when they mentioned a memory care facility, as if it were something gently floated for later, but their eyes said sooner, much sooner, and I let them talk. Because when people think you're fading, they forget to be careful. I kept a small notebook under the liner of the bread drawer. I wrote everything down, times, dates, strange phrases I overheard when I walked into a room too quickly. I jotted down when the mail didn't arrive, when the pharmacy called and someone else had answered, when my church friends stopped reaching out altogether. Then came the Wednesday afternoon that changed everything. It had rained all morning. It's a kind of soft, tapping rain that makes the windows look like they're crying. I was in the hallway folding towels when I heard her voice in the kitchen. She didn't know I was home early for my doctor's appointment. She was on speakerphone. I stayed just out of sight, behind the archway, one hand resting on the wall. Her voice had that smooth, performative quality, the kind she used when she was trying to sound like she was doing the right thing. She said my condition was progressing, that she was concerned about my cognition, that she had medical documentation, or would soon, that she wanted to secure guardianship before anything became too difficult. The man on the phone, I later learned he was another attorney, asked if I'd shown resistance. She laughed and said I was too tired to resist. It's just a little difficult. But manageable. Just a little difficult. I stood there for a full minute after she hung up. The folded towel in my arms was damp against my chest, and my legs felt loose, like they belonged to someone else. She was going to file for guardianship. She had been laying the groundwork for months. Notes in my medical chart, exaggerated accounts of confusion, forgetting to give me messages, isolating me just enough that when she made her claims, no one would challenge her. And I realized in a cold and quiet rush that I was no longer simply being erased. I was being repositioned, turned into a burden, a shadow version of myself, someone to be handled, declared that night. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and my notebook, lit by the small amber glow of the oven clock. I went through every note, every page, every instance of doubt she had planted. And I began to transfer the truth into a letter, not to her, not to him, but to myself. I needed to remind myself of what I still knew: my name, my birthday, my first address, the color of the curtains I bought with my own paycheck in 1978, the phone number of my sister, who now lived in Michigan and always picked up on the second ring, the name of my high school English teacher, smell of my mother's scarf, drawer, the date of my wedding, the sound my husband made when he laughed at his own jokes. I wrote them all down, one by one, like a map back to myself. Because when someone starts convincing you that you don't remember, you need anchors. And I found mine in every line. In the morning, I made an appointment with my own doctor, not the one she had selected, who always seemed to glance at her first before answering me. I found an independent geriatric specialist, paid for in full from the private account I had opened under my maiden name. I told the receptionist very clearly that no one else was to be notified. I went in alone. I wore my good coat, answered every question with clarity and detail. I completed the memory test they gave me, aced it, in fact. I asked for a full report to be sent directly to me and a notarized letter to confirm my current capacity. The doctor said it plainly: "You are not in cognitive decline. You're being manipulated." I took that letter home like it was gold. The next step was the paperwork. I went through every drawer they hadn't locked, every folder they hadn't thought. to check and scan anything with my name on it. I contacted the DMV and removed her as an emergency contact. I filed paperwork with my lawyer to revoke the power of attorney she had forged with an old signature. The one I used to use before arthritis changed the shape of my name. My lawyer submitted an affidavit confirming I was of sound mind and acting of my own will. We created a timeline, documented the false claims, the withheld mail, the changes to accounts I never authorized. And then, on a quiet Thursday morning, I began making phone calls. First to my bank, then the utilities, then the health insurance office. Each time I explained clearly and calmly, I am the account holder. There has been unauthorized access. Here is the documentation. I could hear it in their voices, the confusion, the discomfort, the slow realization that someone had presumed too much on my behalf. The final step was the home, the house that had been mine for decades, where I raised her, where I built every wall of the life she now used as scaffolding for her schemes. She thought it belonged to her? In practice, if not yet on paper, but my name was still on the deed, so I listed it not through a realtor she knew, through a private firm my friend had used, discreet and swift. We scheduled the walkthroughs for days. She and her husband were out. I kept the house pristine, played music to soften the air, baked muffins to make the kitchen smell alive. I accepted the offer on a Tuesday. The papers were signed the following Friday. The check was delivered to my new post office box on Monday morning, and didn't say a word, not yet, because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's preparation. The sale closed quietly, just like I'd hoped. There were no signs, no showings. While she was home, no changes to the house that could give anything away. I made sure the lock stayed the same. I didn't pack anything noticeable. I waited, patient and deliberate, like I had waited through colic and fevers and long lonesome nights when her father worked double shifts. But this time, I wasn't waiting for love or healing. I was waiting for my exit. The certified check arrived in a thin white envelope with a gold seal. I picked it up from the post office with hands that didn't shake. It was heavy in its meaning, not in its weight. The total of decades of payments, and repairs and memories and scraped knees and late-night soup, it was mine. Every cent of it. I opened a new investment account that day, my name only. A new will was signed and notarized by dusk. I had 2 copies, one locked in a deposit box, the other mailed to my lawyer. That would be no more forged signatures, no more assumed power, no more whispered decisions over my body or mind or home. Still, I waited, because I needed to be gone before she knew, and that took planning. I began moving things piece by piece, small bags, few books, jewelry, the old quilt her grandmother had sewn, the one she hadn't noticed folded at the back of my closet in years. I moved them into my friend's cabin, the same friend who never once asked why I was suddenly showing up on Thursdays. With a tote bag and a tired smile, she just handed me tea and kept the porch light on. The last piece to move was me, but before I left, I needed one final thing, proof. It came sooner than I expected. On a Sunday morning, she left her phone face up on the kitchen table. I was making eggs, quietly stirring the yolks, when I heard it buzz. I shouldn't have looked. I know that, but I did. It was a message thread between her and her husband. He said the lawyer was ready. She replied that it would be easier once I was declared incompetent, that the house proceeds could be contested, but it'd be complicated for me to argue anything once the paperwork was filed. My hands went cold. I turned off the burner, let the eggs sit half-cooked, while I stood in the silence that followed. She walked into the kitchen not 5 minutes later, barefoot and humming. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her and I realized something important. She didn't believe I could leave. Not really, not fully. Somewhere inside her, she still saw me as the tired woman in the armchair. The one who forgot the doctor's appointment. The one who asked where the checkbook was and waited too long to ask again. She had built a whole plan on the belief that I wouldn't notice, wouldn't fight, wouldn't go. So I did. The next morning, I left before sunrise. The suitcase was light. Only what mattered? A photo or two. Some clothes. The checkbook. The lemon-scented lotion I used on hard days. The last letter my husband ever wrote me, still folded in its envelope like a secret only I needed to remember. I took the train to the coast. I didn't leave a note. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't leave instructions. What she had wanted from me all along. Instructions, signatures, permissions. So I gave her nothing. When I got off the train, the salt air hit me like an old song, familiar and wide. I walked through the narrow streets of the small town where the cabin waited. The shutters were blue, grass was long, the porch creaked like a greeting dot inside. It smelled of cedar and clean windows. I made tea, sat in the rocker, looked out at the water like it had been waiting for me. And that was the first time in years I felt entirely mine. The calls came fast, first one, then 3, then 6. I let them ring, then came the voicemails. Concern layered over confusion. Voice soft and sweet and desperate, like a daughter again. She said she was worried, that she didn't understand, that I needed to call. Then her husband called. His voice wasn't worried. His voice was clipped, angry, demanding. Said things were already in motion. Thought I needed to come home. That I was making this harder than it needed to be. Harder. There was that word. Again. Difficult. Complicated. Uncooperative. They never used the word independent. Not once. I waited 3 days before I answered. She picked up on the first ring. Sounded like she was out of breath. I told her gently, calmly, that the house was sold, that I had all the documents, that the proceeds were no longer hers to imagine, that the will had been revised, that there was no guardianship to pursue, no path forward under her name. And then I said the one thing I had never said to her, not once, not even in anger. I said I didn't trust her anymore. The line went quiet. Then she said I was being cruel, and for the first time I let the words pass through me without apology, without guilt. I let them slide off like rain on wax. I didn't need her to understand. I only needed her to stop. When I hung up, I felt no tremble in my hands, only peace. That evening, I sat on the back steps of the cabin and watched the tide come in. I held a photo of us from years ago. Her in a red scarf, me in a navy coat, standing under the maple tree we used to rake together. I let the image speak to me. Let it be real and gone all at once. Then I folded it back into my lap and looked forward, not back, never back again. Because there is a quiet kind of survival that doesn't require noise or vengeance, just absence. And had finally claimed mine. She didn't stop trying, not right away. That first week after I left, the calls kept coming. Every afternoon around 3, like clockwork. The same soft voice, the same words, wrapped in concern and confusion. She said she didn't understand what had happened, said we were just trying to help, said I must be tired or overwhelmed or even afraid, and she understood that. She said she'd come find me if I didn't answer soon, but I didn't answer, not to hurt her, not to make a point. Just to protect what little piece I had managed to carve out of the wreckage she left behind. I had already done the hard part, the gathering, the fleeing, the untangling of truth from gaslight. But the real work had just begun. Healing, when it finally has room to take root, is slow and quiet and painful in ways no one prepares you for. I spent my mornings at the window. The cottage faced east. The sun came early and golden, spilling across the old wooden floors like a warm hand. I would sit with my tea, wrapped in the same shawl I used to wear when she was a child and ran a fever, and I'd let the light find me. That became my ritual, a way to remind myself every day that I had not disappeared, that I was not confused, that I still existed. Most days I did small things. Swept the porch, reorganized the spice rack, wrote letters I didn't send. The quiet was deep and thick like wool, but it wasn't lonely. It was earned, I thought, a lot about what had happened. Not in a way that brought tears, but in the way you examine something broken, slowly, carefully, holding it up to the light. To see where the cracks really began, there had been signs before the worst of it, tiny, blinking signals I had ignored in the name of love. I thought I had taught her how to be good, to be kind. But somewhere along the way, she had learned instead how to appear good, how to sound kind. And that was more dangerous than cruelty, because when someone cloaks harm in sweetness, it takes longer to name what's being done to you. And by the time you find the words, they've already changed the locks, metaphorically or otherwise. She used to tell me I repeated myself, that I was always going in circles, retelling the same stories, asking the same questions. For a while, I believed her, start to say something and then stop halfway, wondering if I'd already said it that morning. But now, here in the cabin, I let myself speak freely. Even if I had told the same story yesterday, so what? It was still mine? Still true. One day I pulled out an old notebook and wrote down everything I remembered about her childhood. Not for her. For me, the way she used to sleep with one arm across her forehead like she was in a painting. The way she begged for extra syrup and always licked her plate clean. The way she used to press her cheek to mine in the winter when my skin was cold and hers was always warm. I wrote it all down, not to mourn it, but to preserve it. To make peace with what had been real before the shift. 'Cause there was love. Once there was tenderness. But love cannot be used like a ledger. It doesn't earn you the right to silence someone later. And tenderness means nothing when it becomes a tool of control. I had to forgive myself for not seeing that sooner. One morning, just after sunrise, I got a letter forwarded from my lawyer. It was from her. Handwritten. She said she didn't know what had gone wrong. I'd always been so strong and that it wasn't like me to run. She said I must be getting advice from people who didn't know the whole story. That she and her husband were only trying to keep things organized. That I had misunderstood their intentions. She ended with a sentence that sat in my chest like a stone. We just didn't want to burden you with the complicated parts. That was the word. Burden. It rang louder than all the others. I had raised her to believe that caring meant caring, that when you love someone, you show up, no matter how inconvenient it is. I didn't realize until now that she had learned a different lesson, that aging is weight, and weight must be managed, not lifted, not honored, managed. I didn't write back. Not out of bitterness, but because I didn't owe her that. I had spent too many years over-explaining myself, softening my words until they curled in on themselves. Now I had nothing left to explain. I wasn't confused. I wasn't being led. I was not and had never been the problem. What I had become was awake, and awake women are never convenient. Later that week, got a call from the lawyer's office. There had been another attempt to contact the title agency to reverse the sale, but the paper trail was clean and my signature was firm. He told me I had protected myself just in time. I thanked him. Then I hung up the phone and let the silence settle again. I stepped outside and stood barefoot on the porch. The slats cool under my feet, the breeze smelling faintly of seaweed and salt and something clean. And I thought, this is what freedom feels like, not loud, not triumphant. It's just quiet and unquestioned. There were no locked drawers in the cabin, no withheld mail. No condescending tone every time I forgot a name or paused too long in a sentence. I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I didn't have to second-guess the shape of my own thoughts. I made dinner for myself that night, a simple one. Rice and lentils and a single piece of fish. I set the table with care. Cloth napkin, candle, a lemon slice in my water. Not because anyone was watching, but because I wanted to remember that I was still worth tending to. That night, before I fell asleep, I said it aloud for the first time. I am not a burden. And the room, still and golden in the lamplight, did not argue. It was sometime in early spring when I let the first person visit, not her. Not him. It was Lenora, my friend of nearly 30 years. The one who used to bring me sweet potato pies on Thursdays and who always said the wrong thing in the right moment. She arrived with a plastic container of soup, still warm, and a loaf of bread wrapped in a dish towel. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask why I'd left or what had happened. She just sat beside me on the porch and handed me a mug like we'd done this every week for years. I hadn't realized how much I missed being seen without being studied. We sat there until the wind turned cool, till the light slanted and the sky shifted to that soft lavender blue that means the day is folding itself up. I told her the story slowly, not all at once, but in pieces, as if I was unpacking it from a long buried box. She didn't interrupt. She didn't say my daughter meant well. She didn't call it a misunderstanding. She just nodded. Quietly, furious. Then she reached over, put her hand over mine. I said, "You're not the only one," and I knew, without her needing to explain, that she had her own scars from family she once gave everything to. That maybe this betrayal, this quiet theft of dignity, wasn't as rare as I used to believe. That evening she left a list of names and numbers. People she trusted, people I could call if things got messy again. A retired financial advisor. A woman who'd gone through conservatorship reversal. A notary who made house calls. People who didn't ask for explanations, only clarity. I didn't call any of them that week. But I tucked the list inside my cookbook, between the pages with a lemon tart recipe. It was enough to know the help existed. By now, the days had settled into something like rhythm. I woke early, not from noise or obligation, but because my body had finally found rest. I wrote in my notebook most mornings, not lists anymore, but memories, thoughts, observations. Sometimes just a sentence like, "The air smells like pine and promises." Sometimes whole pages on the way, "Guilt lingers in your bones even when you've done nothing wrong." I still hadn't spoken to her since the letter, but she was trying in new ways now. There was a message from a cousin I hadn't heard from in 5 years, saying my daughter was worried and didn't know how to reach me. Then an email from someone at our old church offering to mediate a conversation if I was open to reconciliation. It was all so carefully staged, a performance of concern. But underneath it, I could feel the same shape. Control, no one. Ever asked me what I needed? It's just what she wanted. I replied to none of them. Instead, I did something small and significant. I planted a garden. There was a patch of dirt beside the porch, just wild grass and a few stubborn weeds. I spent an afternoon clearing it, digging into the soil with bare hands. I planted lavender, basil, marigolds, and tomatoes. Things that needed care, but not too much. Things that would grow as I did. That night, with dirt still under my fingernails, I made tea and sat by the window. Watching the garden sleep under moonlight, I thought of the years I spent tending to people who had already made up their minds about me. Years of shrinking myself to keep the peace. Years of letting someone else speak for me. Doctor visits, insurance questions, bank tellers, even neighbors. It crept up on me. The erasure. It started with help and ended with invisibility. But now, here in the hush of this small cabin, I was no longer fading. I was rooting. One morning. Weeks later, I got a letter from her again. This time it was typed, less emotional, more direct. She said she was seeking legal counsel to challenge the house sale. Said I had acted irrationally, possibly under duress. Said I had been persuaded by outside forces. Said she intended to ensure I received proper care and ongoing support. It was a threat, cloaked in concern. But I had already done the work. I took the letter to my lawyer. He smiled the kind of tired smile attorneys do when they've seen too many children weaponize the language of love. He told me not to worry, said my paperwork was clean. Said the notarized doctor's evaluation one had submitted 6 weeks earlier. Was airtight. She could try, but she wouldn't win. I walked out of his office into the bright afternoon. My shoulders looser than they'd felt in years. That evening, I sat on the porch and watched the tomatoes begin to sprout. Just little green shoots poking up from the dark soil, but enough to make me feel something shift in my chest. Life returning, not loud, not fast but steadily. Inside, I opened my email and sent one line to my lawyer. If they file anything formal, I want a meeting at the table in person with witnesses. I signed it with my full name. Not because I had to, because I wanted to see it written. All of it. Undiluted. There's a certain peace that comes from reclaiming your name, your voice, your will, in every sense of the word. And now I was almost ready. Not for revenge. Not for a fight. For closure. For the confrontation I had been walking toward quietly. Every single day I didn't want a scene. But I knew there would be one. When people like her feel power slipping through their fingers. They grasp harder. They raise their voices. They spin stories with just enough truth to sound believable. They say they're hurt. They say they're confused. They say you've changed when what they mean is you're no longer under my thumb. The meeting was set for a Thursday. Neutral ground, a small conference room in my lawyer's office. Long table, glass walls, sun leaking in from the west. I arrived early, not out of nervousness, but to settle myself. I wore navy, simple, sharp. My hair pulled back, my papers in a leather folder that once belonged to my husband. I sat in the far seat, upright, hands still. I had nothing to prove. When she walked in, her eyes scanned the room like she was walking into a negotiation. Not a reckoning. Not yet. Her husband came too. Of course he did. It's always behind her, like an echo that thought it was a voice. They sat across from me. Their lawyer followed a younger man in a blue suit who kept adjusting his tie, like it was choking him. My lawyer greeted them with civility and handed out copies of everything. The property transfer, the financial statements, the letter from my doctor, the notarized documents, the time-stamped email chain, the will. My new will. There it was, black ink, firm signature, legally sound. No ambiguity. No loopholes. Just the truth, printed clean. She didn't speak right away. She looked at each page like she was trying to catch a mistake, a crack, a typo she could wedge her outrage into. Her husband leaned forward, started to say something, and my lawyer cut him off. Calm as water, let's allow her to speak for herself. It was the first time in over a year. Someone said that in a room where she was present. I thanked him with a glance. Then I turned to her. I told her what? She already knew that I had discovered the documents she had drafted behind my back, that I had seen the messages, heard the phone calls, traced every decision she made on my behalf without my consent, that her claim of care was built on manipulation, that I was of sound mind, that I had chosen every step of my departure. And I told her the most important thing of all, that I did not leave because I was lost. I left because I was found. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then tried a softer angle. Said she didn't understand why I had shut her out, why I had made it so public. She said we could have worked things out quietly, Kate like family. I almost laughed. Quietly was exactly how she wanted everything. Quiet control, quiet signatures, quiet legal transitions while I poured the tea and thanked her for being so helpful. No, I said, quiet is where the damage lives. Her husband tried again, said it had all been a misunderstanding, that I'd always struggled to manage the more technical side of things, and they were just trying to ease the burden. I looked at him and said what I had waited months to say. I was never the burden. You were just uncomfortable with my autonomy. His face flushed. He didn't speak again. The lawyer across the table began shifting strategy, realized the documents were solid. He asked what I wanted, and I told them, nothing, no money, no settlement, no apology. Just distance, just acknowledgement of my independence. A formal agreement that they would cease all legal and financial action involving my name, that they would not attempt to contact my providers, my bank, my attorney, or my medical team ever again. It was done in under an hour. When they left, she turned back one last time and said, not angrily, not with spite, but with something like disbelief, you really don't need us anymore, do you? I told her no. And I think that was the part that stunned her most, because control only works if the other person believes they are lacking, that they need, that they depend. But I had stopped needing a long time ago. Somewhere between the missed phone calls and the doctor visits she took without me, somewhere between the empty mailbox and the half-truths, I had rebuilt myself in the silence she thought would undo me after they left. I didn't celebrate. I just walked out into the afternoon, wind in my face, coat trailing behind me, breath steady. I went back to the cabin and stood in the garden. The basil had thickened. The tomatoes were starting to bloom into color. A single marigold had bloomed bright and golden near the edge of the soil, bold and unafraid. I bent to touch it. It was soft, but strong. That night I slept with the window open. The breeze moved the curtains gently, the moonlight resting on the pillow beside mine. I lay there, listening to the soft rhythm of my own breath, and felt something unnameable loosen in my chest. Not triumph. Not pride. Peace. There are some victories that don't look like a raised flag or a slammed door. They look like walking away without flinching, like keeping your name, like planting something and watching it grow on your terms. They look like quiet freedom. And now that I had it, would never trade it again. The days after the meeting were the quietest I'd known in years. No voicemails, no surprise letters, no distant relatives calling to check in on behalf of someone else. Just silence. Not the kind I used to fear, the kind that filled rooms like dust when no one came to visit, but a different kind. The kind that meant no one was tugging at me, pulling at the edges of my life, trying to rearrange it. It was, in every sense, my own life again. Some mornings I woke up and didn't move right away. I just lay there, listening to the birds beyond the window. The distant rustle of wind against the eaves, the creak of the porch settling its bones. And I'd think this is what I bought back. It's right here. I didn't need to be busy to feel full. I didn't need a dozen visitors or grand plans. I needed slowness, truth, space, and the ability to choose what to do, where to go, when. To speak. Choice, that was what had been taken from me in pieces. Not in some grand declaration, but in dozens of small assumptions, little erasures. My voice softened, then dismissed. My habits questioned. My paperwork signed without my seeing. My calls answered on my behalf. My memory slowly, deliberately doubted, but now I could choose again. And I chose peace. One evening, I walked down to the water. The path from the cabin wound through a patch of woods. Soft pine needles beneath my shoes, light dimming in a way that made the world feel paused. The shore wasn't far, just a small inlet where the waves lapped gently, and the air always smelled of salt and something older than sorrow. I sat on a bench worn smooth by time in my pocket. I carried something I hadn't looked at in months, a folded photograph. One of the last ones of all three of us, taken just before her father passed. She was standing between us, wearing his old cardigan, grinning too wide, trying not to cry. I looked at it for a long time. There was love in it. I won't pretend there wasn't. We were a family once. Messy, real, flawed, but whole. Before grief carved its hollow. Before ambition turned into entitlement. Before help became a form of harm. I whispered into the wind, not forgiveness. Exactly. But a kind of release. You can let something go without welcoming it back. That's something they never teach you. I no longer hoped she'd understand. I no longer replayed the conversations I wished I'd had. I no longer needed her to see me clearly, because I saw myself, and I was enough. A few days later, I got a letter from the title agency confirming the deed had been officially recorded, in my name alone. I framed it, not out of spite, but because it was the symbol of a life reclaimed, a document that said she didn't vanish. She chose to rise. I hung it in the hallway just outside the kitchen, right beside the photo of the lemon tree I'd always wanted to plant. I hadn't done it yet, but I would. When the season turned warm, I'd find the right soil. I'd dig deep. I'd water it each morning like a vow. Sometimes I still caught myself waiting for something, a call, a knock, an apology that wouldn't come. But those moments grew fewer, lighter, like the memory of a bruise that doesn't ache anymore, even when pressed. Lenora visited again, bringing blueberry muffins and a puzzle with missing pieces. We laughed for an hour, trying to make it work before giving up and tossing the box aside. She said I looked younger, said maybe I was finally sleeping right. She didn't pry, she never did. She just kept showing up with warmth in her hands. One morning, I woke up to a hummingbird at the window, tiny, bright, pulsing in place like a heartbeat outside the glass. I watched it until it flew off. And I thought even the smallest things come back to life when the noise quiets. I started writing letters again. Real ones, not the kind I tore up after. Letters to old friends. To cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. To people who once mattered and maybe still did. Some replied, some didn't. But the writing felt good, like stitching something back together with thread I'd thought I lost. I didn't mention my daughter in those letters. Not out of bitterness, but because she no longer defined the story. She was part of it, yes, but only one part, the middle chapter of a much larger book. And I still had pages left to write. In town, I found a community center with a bulletin board full of crooked flyers. I signed up for a painting class. The first time I picked up a brush, my hand trembled. The second time, it didn't. The instructor, a kind man in his 70s, with hands that always smelled of linseed oil, said I had a steady eye, that my lines were careful but bold. I took that home with me, let it sit beside my tea and my quiet. One night I wrote a sentence in my journal and underlined it twice. She mistook my silence for surrender. It was seed, and it bloomed, not all at once, not in bursts, but slowly, beautifully, quietly. Just like me. The lemon tree arrived in a wooden crate the size of a hope chest. I had ordered it weeks earlier. On a day when the sun fell differently across the porch and I felt the quiet ache of wanting to begin. Something new, not to replace what had been taken, not to prove anything, but to root myself, quite literally, in a life I had chosen. The delivery driver helped me slide it onto the gravel beside the garden patch. The soil was ready. I had spent the previous week turning it over with slow, steady hands. I wanted it to feel prepared, as if the earth itself were making room for my next chapter. I planted the tree just before dusk, the air soft and slightly sweet with the promise of rain. I pressed the roots into the ground, patted the soil gently, then watered it with a copper watering can I'd found at a second-hand shop. There was something deeply reverent about it all, like a ceremony I hadn't known I needed, and afterward sat on the porch with dirt still beneath my fingernails and watched the sky change. Color. Blues fading to lilac, then to a hush of gray. I had done so much unraveling, so much unlearning. Now I was beginning again. The tree was small, slender, its branches shook in the breeze. But it was alive, and that mattered. It would grow if I cared for it, if I stayed gentle, if I let it. A few days later, I received an envelope postmarked from my old city. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was her. The letter was short, just a few lines. She said she didn't understand how things had gone so far, that I had always been too emotional, and maybe that was why I had taken everything so personally. She hoped I'd come to my senses, that I would reach out, that we could reset. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a flick of her wrist trying to erase the past. I folded the letter without reading it twice, set it in the drawer where I kept the used batteries and light bulbs I never needed. I didn't write back. Some things don't need responses. Some silences say everything. Instead, I wrote a letter to myself. It started with, "You were right to leave," and it ended with, "You're allowed to be free." That same week, got a message from my doctor, the one I had seen on my own without her arranging the appointment, without anyone sitting beside me pretending to listen while speaking for me. He was retiring soon, said, and wanted to thank me for the letter I'd written him after the evaluation. I'd forgotten I'd done that, a short thank you note, scribbled late one evening when I couldn't sleep and needed to pour something out of my chest. He said it reminded him why he chose the field in the first place, to witness, not to assume, to protect, not to guide. I saved that message, proof that somewhere along the path of dismantling the lie they built around me, I had left something good behind. In town, the painting class was growing. We'd moved from landscapes to still life. Pears, teacups, a single daffodil in a glass jar. Oh, yeah. My hand was steadier now, my lines bolder. I wasn't afraid of the blank page anymore. I let the brush wander. Sometimes it created something lovely. Sometimes it didn't, but always it was mine. After class, I began staying behind, helping the instructor clean up, sweeping flecks of paint off the wooden floor, rinsing jars in warm water. He said I reminded him of his sister. She'd left. Her marriage at 70 started fresh in New Mexico with nothing but a suitcase and a dog named Violet. He said starting over didn't mean failure. It meant refusing to stay small. I liked that starting over isn't weakness. It's courage in slow motion. One night, a storm came in sudden and fierce. It's rain on the roof like a drum, wind pulling at the shutters. I lit candles around the cabin and sat beside the lemon tree outside, wrapped in my coat. The rain soaked the soil. The branches bent but didn't break. I whispered to it, not words, it's just presence. I'm still here. I'm still standing. You and me both. By morning, it was still upright. A little muddy, a little bruised, but upright, like me. The weeks rolled forward gently. No more lawyers, no more letters. My name, finally, belonged only to me. On every line, on every document, in every room, and every time I walked through the cabin, I felt that knowing in my bones. I was no longer managed, no longer monitored. I was mine. I began writing more, not just notes or letters, but small reflections, essays, maybe, little stories tucked into notebooks or left on scraps of paper near the sink. Some I threw away, some I saved. Didn't plan to publish them, just wanted to hear myself again, to let the words return without fear of being questioned, and slowly they did. The voice I thought I'd lost had never gone far. It had just grown quiet under the weight of being ignored now. Spoke freely. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea and listen to the wind. In the branches of the lemon tree. It had grown to new leaves, just small ones, pale and brave. They shimmered in the light. That was enough. That was everything. The call came on a Thursday morning. I was kneading dough in the kitchen, soft music playing low from the radio on the windowsill, the scent of rosemary rising from the sprig I'd crushed between my fingers. The number wasn't one I recognized, but something in me paused. The same pause you feel when a shadow crosses your window, familiar in shape but not in welcome. I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked up. It was her lawyer. It's not the young one from the meeting. This was someone new. Older, stiffer, more cautious in tone. He said she had decided not to pursue any further legal action, that her previous attempts had no standing, that she was withdrawing all claims, that a written confirmation would be sent for my records. I thanked him briefly, then asked why she hadn't called herself. He said he wasn't at liberty. Say, of course he WASN single quotes. We hung up and the kitchen felt just as quiet as it had before. The dough was still rising. The world hadn't shifted. But I had Dot. It wasn't closure she had given me. It was surrender. Not the kind that comes with humility or insight, but the kind that comes when there's nothing left to gain. She had tried to control the story and failed. And now she was retreating. Not because she understood, not because she had changed, but because she couldn't win. I wish I could say that moment filled me with triumph, but it didn't. Single quotes. It filled me with a soft kind of grief, not loud, not bitter. Just the slow understanding that she would never come back the way I remembered her, not what we had, mother and daughter, Sunday mornings. Lemon zest and cinnamon sugar, lived in a time I couldn't reach anymore. It wasn't mine to retrieve, only mine to remember. I took the letter when it arrived and filed it away with the rest in the folder I kept in the cabinet beneath the bookshelf. Sat there quietly, nestled between property records and medical reports, the paper trail of a war I never wanted to fight. A map of how I survived it that night. I made soup and poured myself a small glass of red wine. I sat by the lemon tree under the stars. The ground still warm beneath my feet, the branches moving gently above me. I didn't speak, I didn't cry, just breathed. And I let the stillness stretch. The next morning I wrote a letter, not to her, not to anyone really, just addressed it to the woman I used to be. I told her she was brave. I told her she had been right to listen to her instincts, that her forgetfulness wasn't forgetfulness. It was noise, the noise of being constantly corrected, constantly doubted, constantly spoken over. I told her that confusion, when planted by someone who says they love you, is a slow poison. But she had spit it out. She had found her way back, and I told her I loved her. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where I kept the little notes my husband used to leave on the fridge. The ones that said things like "milk's gone" or "you looked lovely this morning." Every note we save is a version of love, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. Later that week, I ran into someone from the old neighborhood, a woman named Frances, who had known me back when my daughter was still in high school. She'd moved to the coast last year after her own daughter had gone through a divorce. We saw each other in line at the bakery, both reaching for the last apple tart. She stepped back and smiled. "You take it," she said. "I remember your hands. You always made the best pies at the church fair." It nearly undid me that someone remembered my hands, not just my name. That she recalled the way I made things, not the way I struggled or the way I was labeled in someone else's narrative. We sat at a cafe afterward and talked for hours. Not about the hard parts, not at first. Just about spices and old songs and how everyone seems to be rushing even when they have nowhere to be. Eventually, she asked about my daughter. I told her the truth. Not the legal version, not the polished one. Just that we don't speak anymore, and that I've made peace with that. That sometimes love turns into something else. And we have to recognize when the shape no longer fits. She nodded and said, "My son hasn't spoken to me in 2 years. Something about boundaries. But I think he really meant space." We were quiet after that. Two women with too much history to wear it on our sleeves. Before she left, she gave me her number. Said she lived only a few blocks away. Said I should come. "Over 4-card night next Wednesday?" I said. I would. And I meant it. Because something had begun to return to me. Not just my freedom, but my connection to others. People who saw me as I was. Not a burden. Not a legal case. Not a confusion to manage. But a woman. A full woman with stories and softness and the right to her own silence. That evening, I made lemon tea with honey and curled up with a book on the porch. The tree was growing, not fast, but surely. A single bud had formed near the top, pale green and tentative. It might bloom, it might not, but it had tried. And that was enough. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for more letters. I didn't wonder if she still spoke about me in rooms I'd never enter, because I had entered a new room now. A quiet one, and it had windows and roots and light that belonged only to me. Spring turned the corner gently that year. Not with sudden bursts, but in slow drifts. Longer light in the evenings, warmer patches on the windowsill, tiny flecks of green where there had been only bare limbs. The world softened its edges, and so did I. My lemon tree grew taller. The first blossom came like a secret. One small white flower curled delicately at the tip of a branch. I found it early one morning while watering the soil, my robe still wrapped around me, the air cool against my ankles. It didn't shout for attention, it just was, blooming, despite everything. I leaned in close. The scent was faint but sweet, little sharp. Like memory. And for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not the kind of crying that folds you in on yourself. Not the grief that clutches at your ribs. It's just a quiet stream down the cheeks, eyes full and still, the kind that says, I survived that. All of it. And now I'm still here. I whispered thank you to the blossom, not because I believed it could hear me, but because something in me needed to say it aloud, to acknowledge the way life insists on pushing through, even in the smallest, most unnoticed corners. Later that week, I went to card night at Frances's house. There were 5 of us, all women, all somewhere between 60 and 80, each with her own story folded neatly into the lines around her eyes. They didn't ask intrusive questions, didn't probe. We played rummy and laughed too loud, drank tea with too much sugar, and traded stories about bad knees, worse dates, and recipes that never quite turned out. It felt good to sit in a room where no one measured me against who I used to be. No one asked about her, about the house, about how I'd let things get so far. They just saw me as I was, as I am. One of the women, Margot, brought up how her son had recently asked her to move in, and how she'd smiled and said, "Baby, I love you enough to stay right here." Everyone laughed. But I saw it in her eyes, that flicker of hurt under the humor, that same knowing, that same scar. We all have them, I think. Just different shapes, different timelines, but they rhyme. Afterward, as we walked to our cars under a sky dusted with stars, Frances slipped her arm through mine. "You've got a steadiness in you now," she said, like someone who's stopped bracing. And I realized she was right. I had spent so many years tensed, waiting for the next correction, the next suggestion, cloaked as concern, the next small theft of agency. But here, now, I stood easy. My shoulders down, my breath deep, my decisions my own. Back at the cabin, the porch light spilled across the steps like a welcome mat. I stood for a moment just outside the door, listening to the frogs in the distance and the hush of wind through trees. And I said it again, this time not to the blossom, but to the night itself. Thank you for letting me get this far, for giving me back to myself. Inside, I opened my journal and wrote a list, not of tasks or groceries or plans, just a list of things I had reclaimed. My name, my finances, my voice, my peace, my garden, my mornings, my stories, my space, my yes, my no. I looked at the list until the words blurred a little. Then I added one more. My future, because even now, at this age, in this chapter, I still have one. That's the part they forget. That's what they try to write out of us when they start using words like difficult or dependent or decline. We still have futures. The next morning, I wrote to the local library and asked about volunteering. Not out of obligation, not to prove I was useful. Just because books had saved me more than once and I wanted to be near them again. They replied the same afternoon, said they'd be glad to have me. Said Tuesday mornings were open, so I circled it on my calendar, not because I had to, but because it felt like a promise. Every small choice was now a seed, and I was planting with both hands. Some afternoons, I walked down to the water and collect small stones. I line them along the windowsill or tuck them near the base of the lemon tree. I don't know why. Maybe it's my way of marking time. Or maybe it's enough just to hold something that has survived wind and tide and still comes out whole. I no longer think of her every day, and when I do, it no longer feels like a wound, just a thread in the larger weave. I can remember the smell of her hair when she was a toddler and the way she used to hum while drawing. I can remember teaching her to stir cake batter and how she used to ask if angels had elbows. I can hold all of that without needing to hold. What came later? She was a chapter, not the end. Now I'm writing what comes next. The lemon tree bore its first fruit in early summer. Just one small, imperfect, slightly lopsided, but undeniably real. A pale yellow orb hidden beneath the leaves like a quiet declaration. I found it one morning while watering the soil, and for a moment I just stood there and stared. I didn't touch it. I didn't rush to harvest. I just looked, and then I smiled. A full, quiet smile that reached places in me I thought had gone dim. That lemon felt like something more than a fruit. It felt like a message, like a promise that growth doesn't need approval, doesn't need witnesses, just needs time and breath, space. It just needs to be left alone long enough to become itself. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even Francis. Not because I wanted to keep it secret, but because it felt sacred, like a small private bloom of proof that I had planted something, waited for it, and it had come through. Sometimes I stood out there in the evening, watching it as the sun slanted sideways through the leaves, and thought, this is what healing looks like when no one's rushing you, slow, real. Rooted. That same week, I got an envelope from the courthouse. It was the final paperwork, the official closure of the guardianship petition that had once been quietly drafted behind my back. Dismissed, sealed, done, no action taken. I held the paper in my hands for a long while before filing it away, not because I needed it for anything anymore, but because it was the last piece of the maze I had walked through. A folded reminder that I had once been hunted down with kindness, sharpened into control, and I had gotten away. No one ever teaches you that escape can be gentle, that you can slip out the back door of a life that tried to shrink you, and still carry your softness with you. On Tuesday, I went to the library. They had assigned me to the children's corner, which made me laugh a little, given how often I had worried I'd lost my ability to nurture. But the moment I stepped into that small, brightly lit section with its round rugs and crooked book spines, something in me settled. I shelved books, wiped covers, tucked stray papers back where they belonged. A little girl in a yellow dress asked me if I was someone's grandma. I told her no, not anymore. She nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense, and went back to reading about turtles. It didn't hurt to say it, not like I thought it would. Later, while organizing the returns bin, I came across a copy of Charlotte's Web, the same edition I used to read to her. The one with the blue binding and the sketch of Wilbur. On the front, my fingers brushed the spine like it was someone I used to know. I almost opened it, almost read that first line again, but I didn't, because that wasn't my story anymore. That night, I made a lemon tart. I sliced the fruit thin, layered it over custard, let it chill until the scent filled the small kitchen like sunlight. I didn't eat it all, just a slice with tea on the porch. The rest I wrapped carefully and brought to card night. When I told them where the lemon came from, there was a moment of silence, then a slow round of smiles. Not pity, not applause, just understanding. Margot reached over and touched my arm and said, I bet it tastes like reclaiming something. It did. We played 3 rounds of gin rummy and laughed so much my ribs ached. I stayed later than usual, walking home under a sky thick with stars and the low hum of summer crickets. I didn't need to look over my shoulder. I didn't need to rehearse any stories in my head. I just walked, and that felt like its own kind of miracle. The next morning, sat at my kitchen table and opened a fresh notebook. The old one, the one I had filled with lists and memories and letters I never sent, was done. The pages soft at the edges from turning. The ink faded in places where my hands had pressed too long. This one had clean lines, and at the top of the first page, I wrote Chapter 4. What I did with the silence, because that's what this was. Now, not just escape. Not just survival, but building. Living. Singing softly into a space no one else controlled. I planned a small dinner. Just 4 of us. Fresh herbs from the garden. A pasta dish I used to make when her father and I were first married. A new bottle of wine. Cloth napkins. I even lit a candle. Not for anyone else. Just for me, because sometimes you have to celebrate the quiet things. Not the court documents or the financial reversals, but the moments you realize you are no longer waiting to be asked, no longer hoping to be understood, no longer mourning the version of someone you loved who simply doesn't exist anymore. You light a candle, you pour a glass, you serve something you made with your own 2 hands, and you sit down at your own table fully. Finally, and without apology. The cabin is quiet tonight. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache. The kind that just is like air, like water, like something earned. The dishes are drying on the rack, and the smell of lemon and thyme still lingers faintly in the corners. I can hear the wind brushing the eaves and the soft creak of the porch boards as they settle beneath the weight of night. I'm sitting here at the small kitchen table with the window open beside me, the moon just visible through the branches. Of the lemon tree, it's grown. That tree taller now, little stronger, its roots holding firm. There are 5 small lemons ripening, each one a quiet vow. You've made it through. You state, I think, sometimes about what it means to begin again in your 60s, or your 70s, or any year when the world expects you to shrink, to become smaller and quieter and easier to manage. There's a kind of soft defiance in refusing to do that, in choosing your own stillness, your own clarity, your own next chapter, because beginning again isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to be announced. Sometimes it looks like changing your mailing address and never telling the people who misused it. Sometimes it looks like answering your own phone again, not because you're expecting anyone, but because you no longer need someone else to filter your life. Sometimes it looks like planting something that will bear fruit long after you're gone. I don't think she understood that. I think she believed that her power came from my dependence. That aging meant loosening, slipping, becoming something soft enough to be shaped. But I never stopped being solid. I was only quiet. And silence is not the same as surrender. She hasn't contacted me again. Not since the letter from her lawyer, not since the tart I brought to card night. Not since the evening I folded her last message and set it beside the empty batteries in a drawer. I'd barely open anymore. Sometimes I wonder what story she tells about me now, that I was ungrateful, that I overreacted, that I was confused, maybe even paranoid. I don't correct it. I don't respond. Because stories told from guilt are rarely accurate, and I no longer live my life inside anyone else's version of events. I have my own, and it's quieter, but truer. There's a swing out back now. I built it myself, a wooden plank. It's 2 thick ropes, tied high into the arms of the oldest tree on the property. I sit on it in the evenings sometimes, bare feet brushing the dirt, fireflies blinking, like old memories in the air around me. It reminds me of my childhood, of my mother's laugh, of the years before everything became complicated. You don't stop being you just, because people forget how to see you. That's what I remind myself when the quiet stretches too far. When the memories try to twist themselves into regrets, I didn't leave to hurt her. I left to save myself. And I stayed gone because I was finally able to see clearly. Honestly, that love without respect is not love at all. I hope she learns that one day, for her own sake, not for mine. I don't need an apology anymore. I don't need her to understand the damage she caused, or the way her decisions carved hollows inside the home I once built around her. I have stopped needing things from people who cannot give them. There's a comfort in that, in the release, in the ending of expectations that only brought pain. The sun is setting earlier now. The air has that tilt to it, a prelude to fall. The garden is winding down, the lavender brittle at the edges, the tomatoes finished, the basil gone to seed. But the lemon tree is still trying, still reaching. And I think that's what I've become too. Not blooming in the ways I once did, but still growing in the ways that matter. Still reaching, still alive. I plan to take a trip next month. Just a short one. Train right up the coast, a few days in a quiet town by the water, a room with a balcony, a bookstore, long walks, a journal. No schedule. No phone calls. No one else's voice layered over mine. Just me, just mine. And when I come home, I'll harvest what's ready from the tree. I'll bake something again. Maybe another tart, maybe a cake this time. Something simple, something golden, something good. And I'll eat it slowly, on the porch, with the door open and the light low and the night wrapped around me like peace. Because I didn't just leave. I rebuilt. I rerouted. I remembered, and now I live truly, deeply, quietly on my own terms. And that more than anything else is what? She didn't expect I'm not bitter, not angry. I'm free. And that's enough. That's everything. Now I'm curious about you. Have you ever experienced something like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you stayed with me until now, thank you. I'll leave you with two other stories I think you'll love.